Hi everyone, so today we're going to talk about Macbeth just as a story. Think of it as a story time, like when you watch a story time on YouTube, except this is going to actually help you in the exam. So let's get started. The first people that we meet are the witches. Now, the witches are presented to us in a setting of thunder and lightning. And this is really important because it starts to show us that things are already chaotic. It's not a nice, sunny, happy, warm day. It's presumably cold, it's dark, it's dangerous. And all of these things are really important to setting up the story of Macbeth. So we find out that the three witches are going to talk to a soldier called Macbeth who is returning from the war. So what happens is we see a few of the soldiers talking about what happened in the war. We learn that Macbeth is a really brave soldier who got one of the people that was trying to cause havoc politically, and he chopped him from the chaps. So he basically chopped him from his belly button to here. He chopped him in half. And we learn that's how serious Macbeth is about treason, about going against the government, about going against the king. Also, we are told. So after that, the witches actually meet Macbeth. And he's with his best friend Banquo. They've just come back from the war. And they chat with the witches. Banquo doesn't want to talk to the witches at this stage because they look really weird. They're like women, but they have beards. And there's a lot of weird things about them that make Banquo really uneasy. Now, they call Macbeth with 3 titles. One is that he is basically, think of like a mayor. And the other is that he's going to be a mayor of a new place. So here they're called Thane. So here they say that he's the Thane of Glamis and the Thane of Cawdor. Then they say that he's going to be king. But Macbeth isn't a king, and he's not the child of a king. So he doesn't know how this is going to be possible. What Macbeth does is he decides to write a letter to his wife, Lady Macbeth. Think of her as Mrs. Macbeth. Mrs. Macbeth is not a nice person. In fact, the first thing that we see that she does after reading this letter is that she prays to demons to come and take away her gender because she feels that her gender is constricting her. She feels that if she's no longer feminine, she'll be able to be as ambitious as she wants to be as violent as she wants to be when going into her goal, which is at this point, she's thinking of how to make the witch's prophecy come true. By this point, Macbeth learns that not only is he what the witches first said, but he's now what the witches secondly said. So he is actually now the Thane of Cawdor as well as Glamis. So he starts to think, well, maybe I won't have to do anything to be king. Since he got that second position without having to do anything, maybe destiny will just do itself and he'll find himself king without him having to do anything. His wife at this point has tried to convince him that the only way that he will be king is to kill the king. Back in those days, killing the king, which is called regicide, is very, very dangerous. And because what you're doing is you're going against God himself. You're saying to God, person that you've chosen to rule the country, we don't like your choice. I'm going to make a better choice. Back then, people were really religious, and this was almost a form of blasphemy. So Macbeth really didn't want to do that. He also felt bad because Duncan was a nice king. King Duncan was really beloved, and there was nothing that he'd done to sort of deserve it. Plus, we later learn as well that Duncan is his cousin, and he's going to be killing him in his own home. So usually when you go to people's houses, they offer you food, they offer you drink, they don't kill you. And if they do kill you, they're considered a bad host. So Macbeth tries to talk to his wife and try to talk her out of it, but she starts bullying him and saying that he's not a man. This is one of the most common things that Mrs. Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, uses to bully her husband into doing what she wants him to do by questioning his masculinity. Now, the idea of gender comes in a lot. It's coming when we look at the witches, and even though they're women, they have beards. It comes in with Lady Macbeth praying to the demons to take away her gender and to make her a little bit more male, so that she's able to be a lot more violent and ambitious, like she imagines men are. Now we see that she's sort of teasing Macbeth and saying that he's not a man, and that's why he is so afraid, as if fear is only related to women. And Macbeth actually replies by saying, if you give birth, you'll only give birth to male children. Talk to your science teachers about that one. After he talks to Lady Macbeth, he starts to have a vision. Now, lots of people have been a little bit hesitant as to whether this vision is an apparition that the witches have done to sort of mess with his head, or whether Macbeth is actually starting to hallucinate because he's really stressed out about killing Duncan. This soliloquy, or a soliloquy is just a speech that any of the Shakespeare characters say, but there's no one in the room. It's just them thinking out loud to the audience. Think of it as a modern day voiceover when you're getting to know the characters a little bit better. So this soliloquy is called Is This a Dagger Which I See Before Me? Scene 2, we learn that Lady Macbeth has gotten herself drunk to try and rev herself up to go through with the killing. So we think to ourselves, maybe she's not as strong as she pretends she is, because she has to make herself drunk to be able to do it. Duncan comes to their house and Macbeth and Lady Macbeth welcome him. After he sleeps, Macbeth goes and kills him. Now, it's not enough for Macbeth to kill Duncan. He has to also kill the bodyguards. And what they say as a sort of background story to why they killed the bodyguards is they say that the bodyguards were actually the ones that killed Duncan. And when Macbeth found out, he was so overcome with anger that he went and he killed the bodyguards too. What happens though is Macbeth comes back and he's really, really shaken, and he talks to his wife about what happened during the murder. So as they were about to sleep, the bodyguards started praying, and he wanted to pray with them, and he gets upset because he can't say amen, and he says, I really needed the blessing. If we're looking at his mental state, he's a little bit lost, because how can you ask for a blessing when you're about to kill 2 people? She replies and says to him, don't think about it, just get over it. And then as she's talking to him, she realizes in his distress, he's walked out with the dagger. The dagger, if you remember back to the speech, is this a dagger which I see before me, is just an old term for knife. So he's walked out with the knife that he's killed everyone with, and now it's in their room. So her first thought is, crap, he's going to get us in trouble because now the evidence is in our room. So she says to him, take it back. And he says, no, you can't imagine the scene. There's blood everywhere, there's dead bodies, I'm not going back in there. She tries with her usual, oh, you're not a man, but he's having none of it. So she says to him, all right, I'm going to go take it back myself. She goes back in the room, puts back the dagger, and this is what sets her crazy. What we learn later on in the play is as the bodyguards were about to die, they put a curse on Macbeth and they say, may this household never sleep again. What we learn later on is that Macbeth is tortured by his dreams. He has really bad nightmares about what's happening and he can't sleep at night. He actually goes to the point of being jealous of Duncan because Duncan is now sleeping in his grave. You know it's bad when you're jealous of dead people because they're sleeping and you're not. Worse than that is Lady Macbeth herself starts sleepwalking. And during the sleepwalking, She's reliving the murder, reliving her conversation with Macbeth, and she's trying to wash her hands. Why is she washing her hands? Because she feels that it's filled with blood and that no amount of washing can wash the blood off her hands. That's when we learned that she has gone crazy because of the murders that she's committed. One of the best scenes in Macbeth is when he decides he's going to kill his best friend Banquo, because part of the prophecies that the witches said is that Banquo himself is going to be really high and his children are going to be royalty. Macbeth is scared that someone else is going to fight him for the crown, so he decides that he himself is going to kill Banquo. After he sent people to kill Banquo, him and Mrs. Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, have a huge party. During this party, the ghost of Banquo comes and starts to tease Macbeth. He comes and he sits down and he's just shaking his head at Macbeth. Macbeth sees this and starts fighting with the ghost. Everyone at the party stops and says, "What the hell's going on?" And Lady Macbeth tries to say he's just joking. She returns to Macbeth and says, "What the hell are you doing? Everyone's watching." And that's when Macbeth realizes he's the only one that can see the ghost. So again, there's another sort of apparition, hallucination. We're not sure. And Shakespeare's left it open so that the people who are watching, the responders, come up with their own view on what's actually happening. Next thing we know, we're watching the witches again, and they're putting spells and doing all sorts of things. As they're talking, the head of the witches, Hecate, comes in and starts talking to the three witches. That's when Macbeth appears. He comes and he tries to talk to them and ask them more questions about the prophecies. They give him more prophecies. The most important one for him is that no man born of a woman will ever beat Macbeth. He hears that and he becomes so arrogant because he feels that's it. There's nothing that's going to get in the way of me being king. There's a really interesting conversation between Lady Macduff and her son. Lady Macduff comes and talks to her son about what it means to be a man. Lady Macduff actually dies while trying to save her son, and she's what's called a foil. A foil is a character who's the exact opposite of another person. Who do you know who's female and evil? And while she was talking to her husband, had said, "If I was breastfeeding a baby, looking into the baby's eyes, and I had promised you I would rip the baby out of my breast and dash his head up so that his brains come out." Lady Macbeth. And so Lady Macduff is the juxtaposition of Lady Macbeth. And interestingly, she also talks to her son about what it means to be a man. But her definition of masculinity is really different to our friend Lady Macbeth's. Next, we see Lady Macbeth sleepwalking, and we learn all the things about the sleepwalking and how she's lost her mind. She's been sleepwalking for a while, and her maid gets really worried about her. So she calls a doctor, and the doctor comes and watches her, and that's when we learn about her sleepwalking and washing of the hands. So Macbeth is saying that he'd forgotten, almost forgotten, what it was like to taste fear. Because remember, he's feeling really confident since the witch's last prophecies. They come to him and they tell him that Lady Macbeth has died. He gives a really heartfelt speech called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, where he laments and talks about life as if it has no purpose. And in this speech, we really learn how much Macbeth loved his wife. At this time, the good people come, kill Macbeth, and restore justice to the land. One of the issues that comes up in Macbeth, or one of the main themes, is the idea of predestination. How much of the tragedy of Macbeth, from amazing war hero to king killer, was because of his own choices? How much of it was because the witches had said this is what's going to happen? And so he was predestined. There was nothing he can do. His destiny was written for him, and all he did was just go with it. How much of it was his own choice? The witches could have said whatever they wanted. He was the one that decided to kill Banquo He's the one that decided to kill Duncan. How much of Macbeth was because he listened to his wife? How much of the tragedy of Macbeth was actually blamed on Lady Macbeth, who, in her ambition, would do anything to get there? Now, we also know that Macbeth himself was very ambitious, because when the witches were talking to him, Banquo says, "I can see the excitement in his face." There's a lot of things for you to consider when looking at the tragedy of Macbeth and deciding who's right and who's wrong. How much would you do for your ambition? Everything in Macbeth that was written at the time is just as valid today when we sit and we think to ourselves, can the tragedy of Macbeth happen today? No. Thank you for watching, and hopefully this has helped you, and good luck in your exam.